welcome back. This is Intuitive Living, and this is your boy King J once again, bringing you guys to another great video. Candace Owen is going to be talking on this video, and she's going to be speaking about the absence of a father in a home, the impact, the effects it has on the future of the kids. This is very, very touching, incredibly informative, and I'm looking forward to sharing this information with you. Please pay attention and let's get into it.
Number one is father absence.
Yes.
Everything that happens is secondary to that. Like, it all falls apart once you remove fathers from the home. And I talk about that often, and actually Barack Obama spoke about this. He gave a Father's Day speech.
Yes.
And he started talking about all the statistics of what happens when you remove a father from the home. One simple thing: remove a father from the home, and a child is 9 times more likely to end up in prison, 6 times more likely to drop out of school. 12 times more likely to end up in prison, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 6 times more likely to lead a life of poverty, right? One single element. And there are actually policies that since the 1960s have incentivized that for Black America. That's when everything fell apart for Black Americans. Our families were together, kids were performing better. I mean, literally in every statistic, Black Americans were doing better. Think about this, under Jim Crow laws, right, than they are doing today. Now, nobody would say America has become a more racist society since Jim Crow laws. If they did, they'd be disingenuous and they'd be lying to you, right? So what happened? Well, you tore apart our families, and you turned us into a culture of baby mamas, which is now reflected in our music. So when I talk about Black culture and I say things that need to be changed, our music has taken a hit.
So I personally believe that the 60s, did you watch the show Mad Men?
I didn't watch it, but I know what it's about.
Okay, so Mad Men, I love this show because it's basically a story of an ad company from the 50s and 60s. And I love this show because it shows a cultural revolution that happened in America in the 60s. And you really walk through and see how the world changed in the 60s. I would love to have a show like that for Black America, to show people really what went on in the 60s. Because like you said, I think most people go to the 60s, right, as this era where Black progress was going on its upward.
It was.
And then all of a sudden, 70s, 80s, we see a downward spiral in a lot of different areas. While welfare is a variable, because I believe it was a multi-variable equation which caused these issues. While welfare is a variable, I think there's other variables that we're not talking about as well that contributed to the breakdown of the Black families.
Fear.
And so one of the things, fear is definitely one. One of the things is, so many people quote the 25% of Black women in the 1960s who were single mothers, right? And they said the number went from 23, 25, whatever number you believe, to about 70 to 75 today. Is that fair to say? But most people don't realize that 23, 25% in the 60s was still extremely high.
Well, they said it was extremely high because at that time, family was valued all across America.
Exactly.
It was all about the family.
Exactly.
You're talking about Patrick Moynihan's report, and they said we've got a problem here.
Exactly.
It was considered high.
Exactly. So, because in the white community, the rate was 3%, right? So what's interesting is in the Black community, the rate went from 25% to 75%, 300% increase. And in the white community, went from 3% to today about 30%, which is a 1,000% increase.
Yeah, but way less than ours.
Yes. But percentage-wise, obviously, when you get to higher tiers, it's difficult to grow faster, right? It's way easier to go from 2% to 4% than from 40% to 80%, right? But at the same time,
we did it.
we still went up.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that's really fascinating is that the single motherhood rate was high in the Black community in the 60s. So sometimes I feel as though we're painting, just my personal opinion, a disingenuous image of the 1960s as this utopian ideal time in Black America when there was a bunch of issues still going on.
Yeah, but 23% versus 77%.
No, it's
like, yeah, I
it's,
mean,
it's gotten worse. I think it's fair to say it's gotten worse. But like I was saying,
way worse. I mean, we're talking about it's increased threefold.
Of course.
Right? I mean, that's not like it just got a little bit worse. This is like this went from like an issue that needed to be addressed at 23%, which I do still believe is high, right?
Mm-hmm.
But 23% and 77%. You can't even talk about these two things the same, right? Now, because now you're talking about it was a minority and now it's a majority, an
100%.
overwhelming majority, right? So it was a small minority and now it's an overwhelming majority of Black people that are growing up without a father in the home.
Yes.
So that completely rewrites culture.
No, and I agree with you. And like I said, I'm all in favor of the single motherhood rate being an issue. What I'm saying is that sometimes I feel as though when people are making just the welfare argument that this is the only variable that contributed to the rise in single motherhood, we're having a very myopic perspective of what's going on because it's a myriad of factors. Because what's interesting that you make reference to is that, you love Thomas Sowell. You like one of the guys that you mentioned a lot, and I really respect some of his writings. And Thomas Sowell has argued that in the 1980s, under the Reagan administration, it's fair to say that welfare got cut, right? It's fair to say that he was one of the presidents who actually made government smaller. But what you see as welfare decreased in the 80s, you also saw an increase in single motherhood, and also family structures were still corroding. So if the correlation is simply as welfare increases, single motherhood increases, then the inverse should be true as well. As welfare decreases, then single motherhood decreases.
Yeah, well, him rolling back welfare benefits, he didn't take welfare away from the people that had it. Do you get what I'm saying? So that's not gonna. I don't think that would change, especially in a short span of years. Like for a president can only be president for 8 years, right? Welfare policies that were started in the 60s still exist today, right? So you can have one president that proliferates it, and you can have one president that wants to dial back on it, but they're not going into homes and saying now you're not getting food stamps.
No, I agree with you, but I guess what I'm saying is, and you said 60.
They didn't stop the incentivization of no fathers in home during that time.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? So there was still an incentive to be a single mother. There was still an incentive. And when you're talking about that, you're talking about the diminishing, like they diminished the role of Black men. I mean, I genuinely believe what what we're going through in terms of just the role of Black men is an epidemic.
Of course. And so I agree with you 110%. But what I was saying, like, it's a multivariable equation. So one thing that also happened was globalization, right? Second Great Migration occurred in the 1940s, where a lot of these Blacks left the South. They went to where? Los Angeles. They went to Chicago. They went to Pittsburgh. They went to New York. They went to these cities for these different jobs. And a lot of Black men went for service industry jobs. What happened in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s? The world changed, right?
That also happened way before, earlier in the progressive era, and it didn't change when they did that. The migration has happened more than once or twice. It also happened during the progressive era.
The first Great Migration, but the world didn't change though.
But that's my point, because welfare didn't exist. So I actually think, I'm not saying it's the only variable. I'm saying it's the biggest variable.
Okay.
So if you can look back and you say this migration has happened, the Great Migration first happened, during the progressive era, and nothing changed in terms of the family dynamic, that lets you know that the family was still intact,
well,
right?
Things did change in the 1920s during the Great Depression. Single motherhood went up and broken marriages went up across all communities in America, because what we see is that one of the biggest issues when it comes to marriages, as you and I both know, when you have financial instability in communities, you're going to have higher rates of single motherhood and higher rates of broken marriages. So during that period of time...
But slightly. You get what I'm saying? Slightly. I mean, if you're talking about, of course, if you look at any statistic and you're looking at it over time, you're going to see this, right? During different times. I mean, case in point, during World War II, men were going overseas, they were being killed. There are all these different things that go like this. When you see this sharp increase, something's happened that started this. And this is what's happened after the 1960s, right?
Of course.
So yes, there are tons of other small variables that can impact those things. And I agree with you that we could talk about any one of those elements and say this could have contributed, right? But when we're talking about, we're staying from, 11% to 18%, right? And then we're going from 23% to 77%. What was the big variable? And the big variable is welfare.
Welfare is one of the...
Marrying women to government.
But here's another interesting factor. So also you have to take into consideration shotgun marriages, right? So that's something also that happened as well. So basically what happened was a very interesting study. So in the year 1964, when they analyzed the Black family, like you were saying, Blacks were married at who have been married were married at higher rates than whites. But still, at the same time, blacks had higher single motherhood rates than whites. So what they realized was that for a lot of black Americans, there was a cultural attitude where if you got a woman pregnant, right, the idea was you would marry them. So I hope you guys are following that.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, the cultural attitudes changed.
It did.
In the 60s, right? You had second wave feminism. You had a lot of the women becoming more into the workplace. You had a lot of different cultural attitudes that also contributed to it. So a lot of these women who were once single mothers, right? Because single motherhood was steadily raising during this period of time. A lot of these women who were single mothers who traditionally felt the obligation to get married, right? A lot of them, like you said, did quote unquote get married to the government, but a lot of them chose not to get married because of the disinvention of shotgun marriages as well as no-fault divorce.
Right. I mean, listen, that now we're kind of getting into the space of feminism, and I'm also very opposed
Of course
to
you are.
feminism, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, you're exactly right that's another corollary, and I agree with you. And in terms of, you hear me speak about this often, trying to turn feminism, trying to make women aspire, turn women into men, turn men into women, saying if this shouldn't belong to men, women should want this too. I disagree with all of that. I think that resetting that has also contributed to the breakdown of family dynamics. That's also why I'm against the trans movement. Like, I mean, so don't think that I am only solely saying welfare. I'm saying it's the biggest contributor to the spike.
Yeah.
And then there are all these other elements, and you are correct that after the 60s, there was sort of this push, feminism, environmentalism, all of these isms sort of started popping up after the 60s, and you can talk about how any of them have contributed to the breakdown. But the single biggest contributor for the black community has been welfare, in my opinion. And then there's tons of other things that factor into it, and they're all things that I fight today. So you're not going to find a category where I'm like, oh, but I'm in support of that. I love I hate feminism. I think it's horrible. It needs to be thrown out. I'm not a feminist. I am one of the proudest non-feminists that there are. I believe there are roles, natural biological roles for men and natural biological roles for women. There's a reason that God designed it so that I can hold a baby and you can't hold a baby, right? And it allows you to do certain things that I can't do, and allows me to do things that you can't do. And both of those things should be celebrated as difficult tasks. Becoming a CEO of a company, it's a very hard task.
I agree.
Raising 3 good children
I
is a
agree.
very hard task.
I agree 100,000%.
And there's a yin and there's a yang, and we're now in a society that's trying to foster a disruption of that yin and that yang. And who's going to hurt? Families. It's the breakdown of family. And so, yeah, I would almost say that there's almost this rapid this rapid approach to breaking down the family, and there are all of these things that are contributing to it now.
And so the reason why I want to bring that up is like, because I feel as though when we understand what was causing this issue, then we can move forward to what were the solutions to the issue. So it was an interesting study that was done that said, okay, what happens is, okay, if welfare is a contributing factor, they were like, let's create new welfare incentives, saying that you have to get a job after 2 years on welfare.
Love it.
And so what ended up happening was, interesting thing happened. They found out that single motherhood rates increase, and also...
Wait, when did they make that a policy? I don't think that was a policy in America.
No, not in America. So do you know how like certain individual cities can do different things in regards to local governments can have flexibility for the welfare policies? So... What I forgot the city. I'll share it with you. I'm gonna put all these the citations in the footnotes. So an interesting study that was done, and they showed what happened was that this single motherhood rate actually increased, because what they found was that they were pushing people, different individuals, to saying that, okay, you have to get a job for, because we're not gonna be on welfare forever. So they were seeing that, okay, these women who got jobs post welfare, did that further incentivize them to get married and for them not to be single mothers? And what was interesting was a lot of these women still didn't get married because now the cultural attitude had shifted in the late 80s, 90s with the feminist movement, with a lot of the women power movement. So they felt like, I don't need a man.
Oh, yeah. So I don't want you to think that what I'm saying is that the solution is that if you took away welfare, suddenly everyone would start getting married. No.
And that's what I wanted to clarify for the audience.
Oh,
because,
yeah.
like I said, my biggest thing, when people think about what is the primary cause to the dissolution in the black family.
Cause and solutions are two different things.
Exactly.
So
my argument is it's a multivariate equation where there's so many things that took place. The death of the black leaders, death of King, death of Malcolm X. A lot of these things affected the black community as well. And so in regards to solutions, right? That's where I feel as though, okay, moving forward, right? We understand that this is a problem. We can argue how we got here, but we both agree that this is a problem, right? So, in your personal opinion, what are tangible solutions to help the Black community?
Well, first off, there's no question